Greetings to Stephen Harper and the centre-right political family. My congratulations, Stephen, and the IDU for organizing the first Asia-Pacific Forum. My thanks to Prime Minister Christopher Luxon and the National Party for hosting this forum. I have no doubt that you will improve on the last occasion which was hosted by Prime Minister John Key. I must apologize for my absence. The final rounds of economic stabilization measures have compelled me to remain in Sri Lanka. Therefore, let me bring you up to date on the events in Sri Lanka. There is only one word to describe the events of the last 2 years: extraordinary. It was also 2 years which proved the validity of our economic philosophy. The UNP just escaped total annihilation at the parliament elections of 2020 for speaking the truth that Sri Lanka was facing its worst economic crisis. I was the only member to come into parliament. 2 years later, the crisis reached its peak. 500,000 people had lost their jobs. Poverty doubled from 13% to 25%. Urban poverty tripled. The government had no foreign exchange to order fertilizer, leading to a crisis in paddy cultivation. By April 2022, the government stated its inability to service government debts and declared bankruptcy. Public protest and outbreak of violence on May 9, 2022 resulted in the death of one member of parliament and the burning of 70 houses belonging to members of parliament. The Prime Minister resigned. When requested, the leader of the opposition turned down the invitation by the President to form a government. In fact, no one was willing to be Prime Minister. Therefore, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, President, requested me to form a government, and he further stated that the government group in Parliament was willing to support me. Therefore, I took up the challenge. My government started discussions with the IMF. We also discussed the issues with some of the other friendly governments, including India. As the work commenced and as we were proceeding to take action, there came a second round of violence organized by far leftist extremists and so-called social activists and political activists. On July 9th, exactly 2 months afterwards, the house of the President, the official residence of the President, was surrounded, and the President had to leave the residence and take refuge in a ship, which then left for Trincomalee. The President's office was occupied. Then they marched into my house and demanded that I resign. The opposition leaders demanded that I resign and a government be established under the Speaker. I refused to do so since I had a majority in Parliament. I said, find a majority, someone who has a majority, and I will certainly step down. The Speaker refused to take up the Prime Ministership. By night, my house had been burned to the ground, including my library of 3,000 books. But I did not give up. Next day, there was calm in the city, and on Monday, the 11th, I went into the Prime Minister's office and called a meeting of the Cabinet. These groups then decided that they will make a final push, and on Wednesday, the 13th, they took over the Prime Minister's office after about 4 hours of fighting and protest. I did not want to ask the police to open fire. Then they decided to march on to the Parliament to take over the Parliament, and invariably after that into the Supreme Court. At that stage, I told the Army Command, it's your duty to protect Parliament, do or take whatever measures you want to, we stand by you, but ensure Parliament is protected. That evening, the members of the army stepped out, none of them carried weapons. They came out and they confronted the protesters, and together with the police, they pushed the protesters back and the protesters dispersed. With that, the battle was over. Only the mopping up remained. On July 20th, the Parliament held an election to elect a new president as provided for in the Constitution. I was elected president, and the next day I took oath. This was only the beginning of the challenge. Now we have to tackle the economy. As I mentioned earlier, I turned to the IMF for help. I must also record that the Indian government, especially the Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, made $3 billion available to the government of Sri Lanka. Another person who helped me was Janet Yellen, the Secretary to the Treasury. I must place on record the assistance which made it possible for me to turn around Sri Lanka. 3 ladies. And what is the result? Let me tell you what we are today. I'd like to highlight the key developments since July 2022 in regard to the Sri Lankan economy. In July 2022, second quarter growth was minus 7.4%. In the fourth quarter of 2023, the growth is plus 4.5%, which is indicative of the continued growth momentum outlining the positive impact of the reforms we've carried out over the last 2 years. Inflation was 54.56 in July 2022. It had reached a peak of 70 earlier. And today, it is 0.9%. Interest rates were 23.8% in July 2022. Today is 10.3%. The exchange rate was 361 rupees to a dollar in July 2022. Today, it is 300 rupees. The primary budget balance was minus 5.7% of the GDP in December 2021, which is minus 1 trillion rupees. In December last year, it was 0.6% of the GDP, plus 0.6% of the GDP, and it was a plus 173 billion rupees. So this is Sri Lanka of today, of practicing fiscal discipline and following the policies which all of us are dedicated to. The government revenue has grown by over 50% in 2023 compared to 2022. Enhanced efforts have been made to strengthen fiscal discipline. Social protection expenditure has increased threefold compared to the pre-crisis period. The total number of registered taxpayers have increased by 130% to over 1 million in 2023, and that is not sufficient. We aim to more than double the number. Since mid-September 2023, Treasury's cash flow operations are being managed without monetary financing from the central bank. The improved foreign exchange liquidity in the banking system has enabled the normalization of supply chains and basic consumption. The only restrictions are on the import of vehicles. The government diagnostic report, which is the first in Asia, has been published and measures have been implemented to improve governance and fight against corruption and vulnerabilities. The next step is the conclusion of the debt restructuring process. The domestic debt optimization process has been concluded. The government reached agreement in principle with China Exim Bank, the official creditors committee co-chaired by Japan, India and France. A key component of the IMF program, which extends beyond the life of the EFF program, is the targets to reduce debt. Public debt to GDP to reduce from 128% of GDP in 2022 to less than 95% by 2032. External debt financing costs to reduce from 9.4% of GDP to less than 4.5% of GDP by 2032 the latest. Underpinning these targets, the primary budget balance must record a surplus of at least 2.3% of GDP from 2025 onwards. A new central bank act has ensured the independence of the central bank. Among the other measures which we are contemplating, which will be brought before Parliament, is the Economic Transformation Act, which will provide for a high rate of growth to a very competitive economy. The other is the Public Finance Act. This will contain all the targets agreed to between the government of Sri Lanka and the IMF. We also have other programs that we have planned to help the people. As I mentioned, in addition to the present measures taken to alleviate poverty and to help the low income groups, we have also given a pay increase to the government servants, which has been followed by pay increases by the private sector. Secondly, we will be ensuring that all lands which have been granted to farmers and for the poor people to build houses, which have been given on the basis of permits by the government, will be converted into freehold land. That is, 2 million people will now enjoy the ownership of the land which they had possessed sometimes as long as 60, 70 years without actual ownership. Ownership is a part of our philosophy, and I am glad that I had the opportunity of implementing this program in Sri Lanka, together with handing over the ownership of 50,000 apartments in urban areas to the people who have been occupying it, and I am just following the late Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in this regard. So what I am implementing are principles that we believe in and I believe in, and so far we have had success, and I have no doubt as we go forward that Sri Lanka will be an example of what a centre-right philosophy can do to a country. Thank you.